Welcome to Parenting and Mental Health, put on by Bay Community Health. I'm going to share my screen. I am Dr. Amanda Court, and I am the one that's going to be your guide through this parenting series. Let me share my screen so that we all can see the same thing. So, again, this is Parenting and Mental Health. And again, my name is Dr. Amanda Court. I am one of the behavioral health providers at Bay Community Health. And I do see school-age children and up all the way to adult children as well. I want to go over some ground rules for this workshop. This is a parenting series. This is going to happen every Wednesday from 6 to 7. Everyone is welcome. You don't have to be a Bay Community patient or member in order to participate. So if you know someone else that wants to participate in this, please send them our way. And we would love to have them. The more participation that we have, the better these sessions will be. We're going to go over different topics every week. And then eventually we will put the recordings on our website or on some of our social media so that people can view that at a later time, especially if you missed one and you want to come back and watch the video, you were able to do that. So if you don't want your screen, most of the time we're going to be keeping it on the screen of the slides, but occasionally we will go to gallery view. So when we do that, if you don't want to be seen or you don't want your name to be on the recording, then please take care of that now before we switch the screens. That won't be until the end of the session, so you have plenty of time to take off your video screen. We also will mostly only keep the recording for the psychoeducational part for the beginning, and we won't really post the part that where we have kind of discussion amongst ourselves. So you should be okay, but I just wanted you to make aware that this is being recorded. We will post it on social media, and so just so that you know what's happening. So some other ground rules. This is an environment that is inclusive, so please use inclusive language. What does that mean? That means not using language that might have a bias or a history in something that might be offensive to another population. It also means we're in an environment where this is part psychoeducation, part support group. So like any counseling session, whether it's individual with a counselor or a group, it's confidential. So what we share in here is between us. We are here as a group, and we want to keep this as a safe environment. So what does that mean? That means that once you leave this session and you're so excited, you've learned something, you have something you want to share, or you saw some people in there that you knew and you were excited to share with them, and you walk out and you go to another group of friends, you're like, hey, I saw Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith in this particular session. That's not what we want, right? We don't want to share that we saw other people in this session or that that particular person was sharing about their child or themselves. We're not going to share personal information. So this is just between us, and we need to honor that. Okay. The last thing is that some of us are more talkative than others. I will be fairly talkative in the first half. I'm going to be sharing some information, and then I'm going to stop talking, ask some questions, and hope that you all engage and ask me questions, ask each other questions, share things that have worked for you. And when you do that, what I would hope is that while someone else is talking, you are muted. So please make sure right now that your microphone is muted. I can always check and mute people, but it's important for you to do that. And don't unmute until you want to say something. Raise your hand. I will call on you, and I'll take care of the unmuting. And please allow others to talk. Welcome, Nydia. Is that how you pronounce your name? As people enter, I will hopefully say hello. We were just going over some ground rules. The first couple things. Hello. You probably can't see me. Let me know. Do you see the PowerPoint slides in front of you? Give me a thumbs up if you see the PowerPoint slides. Okay, cool. So welcome. We're just talking about ground rules. We've had varied numbers of people in this. So I just go over that this is an inclusive environment. It's a safe environment. So whether we see another parent that we might know, or we hear someone else talk about their particular situation, that's between us, and we're going to keep it there. This is being recorded. The part that we might, the recording that we might share will be this first part where we talk about the kind of psychoeducation part, and then the group counseling part at the end where we may share personal stories isn't going to necessarily be shared. We want to share the psychoeducation part in the beginning. And the last thing I was talking about is just that this is, we want to be active listeners. And so while some of us might be more prone to talk than others, we want to make sure we give everyone a chance to share. So that's what that's about. So those are the ground rules. There we go. And so we'll get started. Do you have any questions for me to get started? No? Okay, good. Okay, so I wanted to give some facts just to get started. One thing that we know is that 1 in 5 youth age 16 to 17 have experienced or report experiencing some sort of mental health disorder. So that probably means that we know a child that has dealt with mental health challenges, and maybe ourselves as when we were children also dealt with mental health challenge. 1 in 5 is pretty common, and so it's important to go over what that means, what that's all about. And mostly through this series, we're going to spend some time focusing on us first as parents. I am also a parent, so I'm with you. I'm not perfect. I haven't done it all right. I'm screwing my kids up with the best of them. And we all do stuff wrong, and that's okay. What I do plan on sharing is what the research says, like what the research has shown to work. And we can talk about that. And then we can also share with each other what we've found to work or what we've struggled with and kind of talk through it. So the chances that we've met a child or dealt with our own children or other children that have experienced mental health challenges pretty high if it's 1 in 5. And to go a little bit deeper with that, so that's 1 in 5 that experienced some sort of mental health disorder that say they've experienced, right? It's 1 in 14 children that have been diagnosed. That's taking the number down a little bit further. So instead of 6 to 17, we're talking about 12 and under. So 12 and under have a diagnosis of some sort of mental health challenge. 13.7% of children report that they have persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness in the past year. This was in 2022. So we think it was a little bit higher during quarantine. We definitely recognize that during the COVID quarantine that it is a really strong need for children to have that social connection and to be able to have that ability to reach out to others their own age. Much stronger for many of us than we thought. Not for all, but for some of us, I know for myself, it was a lot stronger than I expected. I got a lot of clients in the door that were experiencing really strong negative feelings because they couldn't connect with their social groups. Just a really staggering number I found is 5.8 million children in the US have been diagnosed with some sort of issue with anxiety. That's a huge number. So we want to try and work through things that can help us with that, right? To break it down a little bit further, looking at depression, anxiety, and behavior disorders by age. The reason I bring this is because we're showing the numbers as young as 3 years old and up to 17, right, before they become an adult. The 3 to 5, obviously pretty small, and not surprisingly, the behavior disorders are bigger in the 3 to 5 age than any other age. I attribute that, and most researchers attribute that to the fact that 3 to 5 years old, they're still learning how to communicate. I know adults, we're all still learning how to communicate, to be fair, but they don't have the vocabulary always to share. So when I have the younger children, when I've dealt with younger children, a lot of what I spend my time on is just teaching them the language of emotions, because they don't have the ability to express, I'm frustrated, not angry. I'm irritated, not mad. There's a difference, right? We understand that. They don't. They haven't been given that vocabulary yet. If you think about when you're in elementary school, we were given maybe like 4 to 5 emotion words, right? It was like happy, mad, sad. I don't know. That's probably it, right? So maybe not even 5, 3. And if you ask young children the number of emotion words they have, they don't get to 10. So giving them that vocabulary so they really can navigate what's going on with them can be helpful. As they get older, the other behavior disorders or the other mental health challenges can go higher. So that's the negative. We also want to look at what's the positive, right? So what are the signs that your kid's doing really well? Sometimes as parents, we might be experiencing anxiety, depression, and we kind of can project that onto others. So what are some, checkpoints we can have for ourselves to say like, okay, is my kid going through what I went through as a kid or what I'm going through now? Or just to kind of have some sort of balance sheet. So using that same range of years, right? The 3 years old all the way up to 17. These are the things you want to look for. For a lot of those age ranges, some things are the same. Curiosity is throughout. If your child is asking questions, that's really good. And even though it can be super annoying when they're younger, or actually at any age, if they ask a lot of questions and we don't always know the answers, it's a good sign. So we want to try and navigate that balancing act of being open to allowing them to ask questions, but also, giving them the time and place and trying to manage our own irritation. I can remember when my kids were 2 years old and just that constant asking of questions 2 and 3, well, why? Yeah, it's annoying. That also means though that they're doing okay. They're curious. They feel safe enough to ask questions. When they don't feel safe to ask questions, that's when we start to worry. So that's a good sign. In younger children, the fact that they're affectionate is a good thing, right? If they seem distant, they don't want to give hugs, they don't want to be close to others, that's when you start to get a little worried. For older kids, affection isn't so much of a sign that things are going well. The curiosity is, continues. For the older kids, 6 to 17, we start to look for things like persistence and self-control. So what does that mean? That means when they fail, they get back up and they try again. And that also means that when they're told, hey, don't eat that marshmallow, they cannot eat the marshmallow for a certain amount of time. And the reason I use the marshmallow is that was actually a study done in, I'll get the decade wrong, but I want to say like the 60s. They offered kids a marshmallow. They put a marshmallow, they recorded them. They said, hey, if you don't eat this marshmallow for 1 minute, you'll get a second marshmallow. And then you can eat both of them. Then they studied these same group of kids for the next 2 decades. The kids that were able to wait 1 minute or more from eating the marshmallow and waiting to get the second one were more successful throughout life. Now, are there a ton of other variables involved? Absolutely. But what we did find is the ability for a kid to have self-control can be very helpful. That might beg a lot of questions about kids that deal with hyperactivity disorder. That's another variable that's thrown in there. You can help kids that are even hyperactive to have some level of self-control. Okay. So self-control is also a good one. So that's just things to look for to see if your kid is doing well. So now we're going to shift a little bit from just general knowledge to how we as parents impact our children, both our own state and the state of our children. This kind of goes along with, if you've ever been on an airplane before, putting the oxygen mask on yourself first is a necessity for you to be able to save the life of somebody else. There's a reason why they tell you to put it on you first before you put it on your child. It's true with mental health also. So if we as adults experience anxiety, depression, addiction, overt anger, I say overt anger because we all get angry. We've all had those moments. And we've all had overt moments. This is not a judgment. This is just research, right? So this is just me expressing, the more of that there is, the inverse happens with kids. So if you imagine having a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, addiction, overt anger, that's going to decrease the child's confidence level, their academic performance, their physical and mental. So we just want to be careful within ourselves. We want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves first from a mental and physical standpoint in order to be better parents. And I would say, especially with mothers, that's especially troubling, because just being pregnant is not a good physical state. And then we have our child and we're still not in a good physical state. So we get used to this not being in our optimum self. That said, it's really important to navigate and find that network to support ourselves so that we can be the best parents we can be. And that being the best parents we can doesn't mean being with our children all the time. A lot of times I spend time with clients where the mother or the father is with the child all the time and they're exhausted, they're stressed out, they're angry, they know they're not being their best parenting self or their best self, period. And they're always with their child. I often have the conversation of, well, what is it that's keeping you from letting your child go to a childcare facility for 30 minutes, a half an hour? And we often, as a community, we look for, sometimes it can be cost prohibitive. We look for other options, right? Whether it's family members, whether it's a local co-op, which we do have in this area, finding ways to give the parent a break, because everyone deserves a break. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to stop for a second. If there's anything on this list or otherwise that you want covered over the last several weeks, I've been kind of taking in as parents have been trickling in, what we want to cover, you can put it in the chat. I will take note of that, and we'll make sure we cover that in future sessions, and we'll advertise when we're covering certain sessions. I know tonight we're going to do a little bit of just talking about what we are, who we are as parents and how we parent. The next session will probably be on communication skills, and then we can get into more specifics. So if there's anything you specifically want covered, please put it in the chat, and I'll make sure that it's covered. And I'll pause there for a second in case you have any questions. Okay, yes, you are not the first person to mention ADHD. And we do have actually, we have a couple people at the community that are, what I would consider an expert in that field. And I will do my best to either try and bring them on to talk about specifically, or to suck all the knowledge out of them that I can and relay that to you all, or relay questions and try and get answers over the next several weeks. One thing that I can say with most ADHD kids that is pretty common is that giving them small or like short time constraint activities that allow them to be successful can be really helpful. We can go into a lot of other things. We will definitely spend a session on ADHD. So thank you for that feedback. Okay, so tonight we'll spend a little bit of time on parenting style. Again, I will say this is not a judgment. This is just getting to know ourselves better. And then comparing that to what the research says about different parenting styles. Different parenting styles can create different environments for kids. And those environments all have their good and their bad, right? And we're not just solidly in one parenting style. We're usually a combination of many. And so I want that to be taken into consideration, just like any other personality test. It can be varied. So I'm going to talk about the parenting styles first, and then I have a little quiz that you can take and kind of compare it to these and tell us what you think. So the first one is authoritative. This is different than authoritarian, very different. So I want that to just kind of be in the back of your head. So authoritative is a parent that's, has really firm boundaries and limits. So this is a person that has set very clear rules and continues to set clear rules throughout the child's life, right? The rules for a 3-year-old are very different than the rules for a 10-year-old. Sometimes as parents, we kind of forget that. I know I'm constantly trying to figure out what bedtime is now because of the age of my kids. It's starting to shift, and what makes sense. Um, but once I figure that out, and I make sure the kids know that, right? I'm very clear about firm rules. And by the way, again, I say very clearly, I am not the perfect parent, never claim to be. I've been learning this. I'm constantly learning and making mistakes and maybe getting things right in a while, every once in a while, and sharing those because I'm excited that something went well. So I'm in it with all of us. So an authoritative parent is someone that's both nurturing but sets firm limits, right? They explain the rules, they discuss the rules and maybe even the whys. So not the do as I say, not as I do. That's not setting firm limits and authoritative. That would be more authoritarian. So authoritative is, hey, we don't run out in the street because cars drive fast and that could be very dangerous and you could get really badly hurt. And we don't want you to get really badly hurt, right? That's explaining it, setting a firm rule, right? And it might go as far as also explaining, like, if you do this, so we learned this when, probably most of us have experienced this with toddlers, if then this, right? So if you do this, then this is what's going to happen, right? So if you stay up later than you're supposed to, you can explain all the things that'll happen to the child naturally. And also maybe if there's some reward or punishment or whatever the case may be for the given action or behavior, right? Along with that, an authoritative parent also takes into account the type of kid. Okay, so I definitely have 2 different children. One does very well with forms of punishment and understanding the rules. The other one is a reward-based child. I had to navigate the difference. It's not easy. It's very frustrating because I can't do the same thing for both kids. And that can seem unfair in some ways. And what it does do, though, is I'm navigating based on the kid that I have. So there's a little bit of trying to figure out your own kid. If your child doesn't understand or is trying to figure it out better, listening to their point of view is really important for an authoritative person. So basically you want to think of an authoritative person as kind of like a really good teacher, right? If you can remember back to when you were a child, or anytime you were in school, you had this teacher, you walked in, they seemed organized, you knew what they expected of you. A teacher, a really good teacher, a really good coach, something like that. That's basically what an authoritative parent is like, right? They care about you. They have really specific rules. They have reasons behind the rules, etc. Children that do well with this, as you can imagine, if you're thinking about the authoritative situation, like a good parent, a good coach, right? If you break the rule, like, you broke the rule. There's no question. So that actually creates a sense of security with children. A lot of times parents don't get this. They think, oh, if I set too many rules, or if I have rules, the kid is going to feel like I'm being mean. Believe it or not, or if I have structure, the kid is going to feel too restrictive. For younger children, they expect adults to kind of lead the way for them. So giving them really clear rules is really important. Okay, so let's see what other types. There's a couple other types that we'll talk about. I don't go over authoritarian, that I can kind of touch on that, as it's different from authoritative. Permissive. So this is a parent that they might be very kind, very warm, very relaxed, someone you might want to hang out with if you're a particularly, high energy, anxious kind of person. They might be a nice balance. What makes them a permissive parent, however, is someone that doesn't set firm limits. So one day bedtime's at 8, another night bedtime's at 10, and there's no real rhyme or reason why the bedtime changed, right? One night they have to eat their vegetables at dinner, the next night they don't. and no real rhyme or reason as to why that changed. So the important part of this is that there's no identification as to why the rule changed, right? You can be an authoritative parent and say, hey, we're on vacation and therefore you're allowed to have a soda with dinner. That's still setting firm boundaries, right? Because the rule changes because we're on vacation. So then the child knows once they go back home, that's not something they're going to get away with, right? Or they can stay up later because it's on vacation. Our permissive parent, the rules kind of flow and go, regardless of the day, time, season. A permissive parent might also be a parent that doesn't necessarily monitor the child at all. So where this differs from authoritative and authoritarian, right, which isn't so great, is someone that's like always on top of their child, right? Watching them every second, might have baby cams for a teenager kind of thing, constant watching, that's going to make the child really nervous. A permissive parent doesn't watch their child at all, right? So their child's outside playing, they never check it. Okay. That can also make the child feel like a little alone and not like they're being paid attention to. And again, it's all dependent on the developmental level of the child. If you don't have this book, a very helpful book, it's very dry, but very helpful. It's called Yardsticks. You can turn it this way. Yardsticks is a book that basically goes over from 4 to 14 what is quote unquote normal for a child of that age. I found it helpful several times with my clients to kind of help them, to help parents understand, hey, for this age child, it's normal for them to not fully understand X or to not be able to do this. Does that mean that your child might be outside that bell curve? Absolutely. But it does give you kind of a baseline to go, with. So with super permissive parents, children tend to be more impulsive. They tend to be less confident because they don't know the rules. The way I describe this, I'll use a sports analogy, if you walk out on a field and there are no boundary lines and no one's told you what the goal of the game is or what the rules of the game are, they just put a ball in the middle of the field and say, hey, go for it. It kind of becomes Lord of the Flies, right? Like it becomes crazy. And kids suddenly will do things to test boundaries because they're trying to figure out what the rules are. That's why they're testing the boundary and they're not figuring it out. So they might become overly aggressive because they don't know where the boundary is. And that might cause a lack of self-control. It might also cause a lack of self-confidence because they can't figure it out and it feels really unnerving to them. So that's the permissive. Then we have the uninvolved. So we take permissive, right? The parents around, they're, letting things happen, but they're around, maybe not checking in all the time, but they're around. Then there's the completely uninvolved parent. That's the one that for whatever reason, it might be, having to work multiple jobs or, whatever the reason may be, is just completely not present. Maybe they're in the physical space, but completely unresponsive, completely emotionally and physically unavailable, and can even also be rejecting. As you can imagine, this is not where we want to be as a parent. This can cause a lot of issues. This can sometimes, again, this can happen for many reasons. I do see this happen sometimes in divorce situations or addiction situations. It's not the only time I've seen it. When this happens, and with any of these parenting styles, all of them are, we can mend them, right? So we can shift, and we're not always all of one. I have definitely had my moments of rejecting my child or being more permissive, right? We've all had moments where we've kind of fluxed through different ones, certainly been authoritative or authoritarian versus authoritative. It happens, right? It's where we land most of the time. As you can imagine with the uninvolved, this is a child that's just seeking any sort of attention. So these children often seek inappropriate attention because they're just trying to find it anywhere they can get it. They will seek inappropriate role models. So you can kind of imagine where this will go. Okay. So like I said before, these these styles from authoritative, authoritarian, you can kind of see they're all on a sliding scale, right? So the authoritative down to permissive goes from a very demanding to a very undemanding. Authoritarian, which can be cold and unaccepting, or the neglectful, which was that one that was the uninvolved, cold and unaccepting, not really involved at all, to very warm and accepting, which is the permissive. So permissive parents can be accepting and warm, but just not demanding of their children. And that's all good. So it's a sliding scale, right? We're not always in one spot. We might land in one quadrant more than others, but it's not all or nothing. Okay, I'm going to see if I can put this in the chat. Oh, stop sharing for a second. Hello. See if I can get this to come back up. There we go. Oh, why I am. That's not what I wanted to do. There we go. So I'm going to copy this quiz, put it in the chat. So what I would love is and I, we'll share this as many times as need to. We may be able to add this to whenever we put up the video for, within Bay Community. We can add this link. You go in and you go to this link, take a second. It shouldn't take more than 5 minutes just to take the quiz. Because then I kind of want to talk about it, see what you think, how you came out. I have to go back and remember where I landed. Mine was kind of interesting. It was definitely in the authoritarian, authoritative grouping. I will readily admit. So yeah, we'll go there for a second and just take a minute if you don't mind, try it out. Are you able to take it? Okay, good, because I'm getting it, I think. Okay, good. Just give me a thumbs up when you're finished. Oh, awesome. Okay. I was kind of going back and taking it again just out of curiosity. Okay. So, um, feel free to come off mute. And what did you end up getting with your parenting style? And I can um, stop sharing for a second.
Hi. For me, I actually, not surprisingly, got authoritarian. I thought it was more authoritative. I feel like I give them, but I think just the way, especially handling multiple children, I think it's like, nope, now we do it this way.
Yep. And that's totally common. I see that a lot. I see parents a lot go either the permissive or the authoritarian or authoritative route. Wait,
Authoritarian.
authoritarian route, when they feel overwhelmed, right?
Yes.
So I'm curious, for you, how did you grow up? Like, what were your caregivers like?
So my dad worked a lot. So well, I don't want to say worked a lot. He worked a different shift. So he was still sleeping when we woke up to go to school, and then he would be home about 11 o'clock when we'll already be in bed. So I think we spent a lot of time with him, mostly after my parents divorced.
Okay. So it sounds like he was kind of an uninvolved parent for a lot of,
Yeah, more I think the day-to-day activities,
yeah.
but like out of like family things or, like, family functions or something, he was like right there.
Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah. Because so something that I often talk to folks about this is that so when we're stressed out, this goes for anything in life, not just how we parent, but like this. So teachers go through like how we like what our learning styles are, because often teachers, when they're stressed out or they're uncertain or they're unconfident, they go to what they're comfortable with, which is usually how they learn. So for parenting, we often go to how we were parented because that's what we know. Our brain doesn't differentiate between like what was good or bad. It just goes with like what we have past history with, right? It's why we stay in bad situations because it's the only history we have. That's more comfortable than the unknown. So I was curious because, like, sometimes or a lot of times we default to the way our dominant parent was, right?
Yes.
So whichever parent was the main caregiver, or maybe not a parent, whatever the main caregiver was, that dominant parenting style is often where we default when we're stressed out.
Yeah.
It mostly goes that way. Sometimes if the dominant parenting style is like so awful and traumatic, the person can go to the way other end of the spectrum and go, oh my gosh, this person was completely uninvolved. I get a lot of like adult clients that are like, my dad or my mom wasn't in my life or both. And so I am going to be in my kid's life no matter what. And sometimes it can go a little too far, but again, it's a sliding scale, right? And it's always corrective. Um, so you said you were not surprised. I mean,
Yeah.
how did it hit you? How did it feel?
Um, I was hoping I was a lot less. I think, hold on, let me see what the number was. It's let's see, 17 plus for authoritarian, and scoring for flexibility 17 plus, um, and scoring for permissive 14 to 16.
Okay.
So
So there's a mix there, right? Like it's not like you're a zero on all the others. The
right.
flexibility is really important. The flexibility for you to be able to flex because situations shift, um, that's a good thing. If you were super rigid, those are the parents that are tough, right? Um, the permissive, like that's okay. What that's telling me is that you have moments where like you're really overwhelmed and you default to like just do it,
Yes.
or you're so overwhelmed you're like I have no energy left, I don't care, right?
That's exactly it. There are days where I'm just like, I can't do it. I gotta walk away. You need to handle it.
Right. and
Yeah.
and and so what I hear from that is just finding ways for you to reset, recharge. What I do with a lot of clients that are parents that are struggling, and we all struggle as parents. No one gets out of that. And if they say they're not struggling as a parent, I ask their secret and then I usually call them out on it because I don't know any parent that isn't struggling at some point.
Yeah.
As soon as we figure it out, they get older and then there's a new problem. So,
Yeah.
um, so with that, it's putting the oxygen mask on first. So for you, I would say, paying attention to what helps you recharge, and then being able to ask for that or scheduling it into your week,
Yeah.
right? It's hard. A lot of, especially moms, feel guilty about doing that. But if you think of it in terms of, and there's a speaker from the Johnson & Johnson Human Performance Institute that talks to peak performance, right? Like CEOs, executives, and he talks about having peak performance, and he talks about how he would go home to his kids on the weekend, having a really stressful week, and he trained his kids to understand that if him going for a bike ride, like he was a competitive cyclist, him going for a bike ride for a couple hours was essential to him, for him to be one, healthy, and therefore being around for his kids in a good way for decades to come, and also to reduce his stress levels so that he could be present when he came home. He was completely present and he was grounded with his children. So it doesn't necessarily need to be cycling for you. It can be going to a yoga class. It can be seeing a good friend. It can be going to a quiet room and reading a book. But you figuring out what that is going to be really important.
Yeah. And
So,
for me right now, it's even on a daily basis, my husband knows tub time. Keep the kids away.
perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. And that needs to become sacred. It needs to
Yeah.
be scheduled into your week. And what you want to pay attention to is how much tub time do you need to feel reset so that when you do have little ones that are, tugging at your shirt,
Yeah.
you don't feel irritated, right?
Yeah.
That you can be like, hey, I'm with you. And you can respond to them in an authoritative way, right? Nurturing, warm, but setting firm rules. Like, mommy's on a call right now. I know that you want my attention. And this is while mommy's on a call, you need to be doing this, right? That's okay. And we do talk a lot about communication and stuff also. So how was that? How was that to take the test? Like you said, you're a little surprised. It was okay. Did it feel helpful in any ways?
I would say yes, and some were kind of like, I'm not sure exactly what they mean.
Yes, I had several of those where I'm like, no, kids shouldn't be able to do what they want all the time. Like there were
Yeah.
definitely a few, and they do that on purpose. They want you to make a decision, right? But I like
Yeah.
this one because it kind of gives that sliding scale. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for your feedback. And the trick with these sessions is that the more people we have, the better discussion. Like, my hope is that if we get more parents, and this has kind of been the way it's been for a few weeks, is that we get onesie twosies.
Yeah.
So lucky you got me all to yourself, or unlucky you got me all to yourself. So for the last little bit, so this is how they go. We're going to do a little bit of psychoeducation in the beginning, and then we kind of go through something. Hopefully there would have been time where you would have talked to other parents about how they reacted to it, what they thought about it, give you all some time to react, and then we'd bring it back to the group. Do you have any questions for me while we're kind of, we have like 10 minutes left?
Yeah. So basically, like, we're just here like to kind of like discuss different things. Like, would we